Hallelujah, hallelujah, give thanks to the risen Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah, give praise to his name. Jesus is Lord of all the earth. He is the King of creation. Hallelujah, hallelujah, give thanks to the risen Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah, give praise to his name. Splendor the years of all the earth. He is the God of creation. Hallelujah, hallelujah, give thanks to the risen Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah, give praise to his name. This Gospel is one of the most moving in the whole of the New Testament, and it is obviously close to reality. All the details are there. She may actually be weeping and hence would not be inclined to focus well on any face around her. Possibly the Lord himself had an appearance slightly unusual for her, but the voice and certainly the name gave all away in a flash. And we have even the very word that she used, in the language that she used, Rabboni, coming out of her heart. And we have also her reaction, and the reaction of the Lord to her reaction, do not cling to me. Then we have this elevated language, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. And then immediately his thought for the others, go and find the brothers and tell them, I am ascending, immediately this very high language, to my Father and your Father. And there's a whole theology. The fatherhood is not quite the same in both cases, indicating already that there is, even as John writes this, a true understanding of the filiation to my God and your God, again the same thing. And it becomes what is known as the Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle of the apostles. And of course, the male gender is less intuitive, and they are slow to, as we would say, cop on. And eventually, Peter, in his usual impulsive way, goes running as fast as he can to see what's going on. Now, we notice also that there is shining light here. Quite clearly, there is a reference to this miraculous light already, and it is of this light that the whole Church has thought, either aware of it as in the West, but not fully aware of its nature as they would be in the East, but this miraculous light coming from Jerusalem. But nevertheless, it was the same event right over the globe, and only this day I was listening to what our friends were saying there in RD with regard to what I wasn't aware of. They had been reading the writings of Vasula. It's a case that is not yet clear with regard to whether it's authentic or not, but what I wasn't aware of was the fact that she, if it is true, that she is receiving these messages, had been given exactly the same message independently as Myrna in Damascus, and it was actually very strong. And she would have been brought up Orthodox, but her language was very Catholic. And anyway, what the Lord was saying, it would seem, we leave that to Rome to judge whether it's true or not, but the quotation that came was this, that every time that Easter is celebrated separately on earth, Jesus is crucified twice over. In other words, this split is not at all of his volition. And something which I wasn't at all aware of either, according to what they were saying today, was that apparently, if it is true, we don't know, but the Lord would have indicated to this person that the actual true date was that of the East. That's interesting. Interesting. They never change anything, it just carries on. Interesting, interesting, interesting. But I just wanted to finish with one thought today. It's this, linked precisely with what we were discussing before coming in. The depth that they have in their iconography. Now here we have in one icon all the main events of our redemption. And we notice also the way in which these iconographers somehow, after much prayer and fasting, do capture the mystery. And they also place everything in this high key and high language that the Gospel has itself, this nobility of otherness and mystery. And everything in the East has something of that, otherness and mystery, high nobility, and something which suggests, and only suggests, the ineffable, but does so well, by the very fact that it only suggests. And so that is the way that perhaps we ought to relearn to approach mystery, not with too many words, but with that, as it were, trembling and utter fear and nothingness that comes into something we cannot express or even imagine. The tendency in the West is to, as it were, contain things in formulae, which has to be done, but the East is more mystical and poetic. They don't put things quite in the same way, but they believe. And it is perhaps something of this that we need to bear in mind when it comes also to the way in which, for instance, evolution has happened in the West and not in the East, in one specific area linked with this. It's the way that the East understands mystery in this liturgical sphere that we are in now. Do we notice that there is one big difference in the evolution in recent history? It's the fact that in the West, much has been able to happen in a short time because man is in command. In the East, man is nothing when it comes to receiving. Man hands-on. In the West, it is true that under the guidance of the Holy Spirit there was to be a purification and a simplifying willed by that same Spirit of the liturgical transmission. But then, when it came to applying things, man took the place of the Holy Spirit. Now, I just want to make one small reflection. It'll take about 2 minutes, but it's worth saying it once and for all. The problem is partly on the level of the top. We have to say, once and for all, that the buck stops here with regard to authority, bishops. Now, in the West, bishops laid pressure on the pontiff himself, on Rome. Bishops in certain cultures laid pressure, and they were a block. Now, also, many bishops throughout the world followed suit, and bishops carry weight. The difference, partly, not altogether, but partly in the way in which a certain lack of cohesion has been able to come in the West, compared with what has carried on in the East, is due to this, I think. It's a personal take on it, but it's not without, I would say, validity. It's the fact that in the East, all the bishops are taken from the monastic world. They have to be, because the clergy on ground level is married, and all the bishops have to be celibate. Therefore, they're all monks in practical terms. Now, the difference, therefore, is this. The weight of authority is linked also with the Holy Spirit on a different level, that of the mystical life. When you have a body of men of God encountering God for years and years and years in fasting and prayer at the altar in a certain ethos and mode, then the notion of coming into the place of God and doing our own thing just does not enter into the equation and could never. When, on the other hand, we have very intelligent, clever men who are excellent administrators, not perhaps always coming from that same background of hours and hours of listening and waiting to something greater, then there are bound to come into operation other factors. And old Nick loves to mingle himself into those factors in such a way that, globally speaking, the Holy Spirit is not in the same way in command of the game. I just finished there, but it's important at this Easter, when we're all in union of time and interiority at the tomb, to think about these things. John Paul II used the very language that, perhaps we're not sure, but he gave that, it would seem, to Ursula, that he wanted the church to breathe again with its two lungs. This, and this, only this, can bring back into some kind of perspective the way in which man has become centre stage in many of our churches in the West. Bring, O native, both nations bring your richest praises to your King. Alleluia, alleluia, that spotless Lamb of northern dew, paid for his sheep and the sheep you. Alleluia, alleluia.